Good morning. Well, I just finished saying 6 a.m. Mass, but the sun's not out yet, so I thought I'd try and do a little morning reflection today, in part based on today's gospel, which was the raising of Lazarus, but in part following up on my reflection from Friday evening, which was Be Still and Know That I Am God, in which I shared with you some of the reflections of Dom Mauro Giuseppe Lepori, who is a Cistercian abbot. He was basically talking about how normally we're running, rushing forward in life, and the coronavirus crisis has forced us to stop. We have to be still. And when we are still, we can place ourselves in the presence of God. And he meditated on Psalm 46, Be still and know that I am God. We have been forced to stop. But what does this mean in our current situation, he asks? That we can live it with freedom, even if constrained. Freedom is not choosing always and any way that which we want. Freedom is the grace to be able to choose that which gives fullness to our heart, even when everything else is taken away from us. Even when our freedom is taken from us, the presence of God preserves us and offers us the supreme freedom of being able to stop before him, to recognize him as present and as a friend. This is the great testimony of the martyrs and all the saints. In today's gospel from the 11th chapter of St. John, Jesus goes to the grave of his friend Lazarus, and he raises him from the dead. And people began to believe in Jesus. They recognized him as not only present, but as the Holy One of God, as the resurrection and the life. Jesus had performed many miracles in his lifetime. For example, when Jesus walked on the waters, Don Lepori says, to reach his disciples in the midst of the storming sea, he found them unable to go on because of the contrary wind. The boat, battered by the waves, was far from land, for the wind was against them. The disciples struggle impotently against the wind that obstructs them in the project of their reaching the shore. And we feel that way sometimes. We struggle to reach our goals, especially in the face of this crisis. There is an opposite force pushing against us. But, he continues, Jesus reaches them as only God can approach man, with a presence free from all constriction. Nothing, no contrary wind, and not even any law of nature can oppose itself to the gift of the presence of Christ, who has come to save mankind. Early in the morning, he came walking toward them on the sea. Jesus' love, as I pointed out in my homily this morning, extends even to the grave. His love reaches even the depths of hell in his descent among the dead, and he carries off the devil's trophies. Yes, his presence is an unstoppable force, and yet we are often intimidated by the storm. Again, Dom Lepori says, but there is another tempest that wants to oppose itself to the friendly presence of the Lord, our diffidence and fear. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost," and they cried out in fear. They also cried out in fear that way in St. Luke's Gospel when Jesus first appeared at the resurrection. They thought they were seeing a ghost, and they were terrified because they had abandoned him and denied him and betrayed him and fallen asleep. We often cry out in fear. Often what we imagine with the eyes of our diffidence transforms reality into ghosts. Then it is like we ourselves are nurturing the fear that makes us scream. But Jesus is stronger than this interior tempest too. He comes closer. He makes us hear his voice, the pacifying sonorousness of his friendly presence. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." And we who are sometimes trapped in fear, with a stone in front of us blocking our view of life and the world, we need to hear Jesus' voice, not addressed to Lazarus this time, but to us. come forth. When Jesus had calmed the storms and his disciples were then seeing that he was walking on the water toward them, those in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Just as in today's gospel, many began to believe in him after he had raised Lazarus. Only when the disciples recognize the presence of God and welcome it as such, that is, that they stop before it, does the wind in St. Matthew's Gospel in the 14th chapter cease to oppose them. And then immediately the boat reaches land toward which they were going. Only when we believe in the power of the resurrection does the fear that comes from death stop and is transformed into joy. We must stop and acknowledge the presence of the Lord, who comes to us in the storms of life to be with us and give us courage and give us hope in the life he offers. But we could ask ourselves, can this happen in the situation of danger and fear that we are living now in the face of the spread of the virus and its consequences in the face of this situation for all society? To recognize in this circumstance an extraordinary chance to welcome and adore the presence of God in our midst does not mean fleeing from reality and renouncing the human means that are put in place to defend us from evil. This would be an affront to those who, like all health professionals, now sacrifice themselves for our good. It would also be blasphemous to think that God sends us these trials himself to then show us how good he is in freeing us from them. God enters into our trials. He suffers them with us and for us to the point of death on the cross. And this is the real meaning of compassion, to suffer with another. This is the real meaning of the virtue of solidarity, to be with another, even in the midst of great suffering. He suffers with us even to the point of death on the cross. Thus, he reveals to us that our life in trial, as also in consolation, has an infinitely greater meaning than the resolution of the current peril of the coronavirus. The true peril that looms over our life is not the threat of death, but the possibility of living it without meaning, of living it without being directed toward a greater fullness of life and toward a greater salvation than mere health. This pandemic, with all it implies, is an occasion to truly stop, not only because we are forced to stop, but because we are invited by the Lord to stand before him, to recognize that he, at just this moment, comes to meet us in the midst of the tempest of circumstances and of our anxieties. Even in the midst of death, he will come into the tomb. He proposes to us a renewed relationship of friendship with him who is beyond doubt capable of stopping the pandemic, as he stopped the wind and as he stopped even death itself from having a final word over Lazarus. He brought Lazarus forth from the tomb, at least for a little while. Lazarus would have to die again, but Lazarus will be raised again in the resurrection of the flesh on the last day. The Lord renews for us the gift of his friendly presence. His presence defeats our frailty and our fear. His words to us walking on the sea, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." He wants to lead us immediately to the ultimate and full goal of human existence, joy with God in heaven. And it is he himself who remains with us and walks with us. May we enjoy this Sunday, the day of the Lord's resurrection, for he remains with us. Christ is alive. He has risen from the dead. God bless you.